Hello, I'm your instructor, and we're going to be looking this time at chapter 6 and then the beginning of chapter 7. So we're going to be looking at Athena, Poseidon, and Hermes. The main figures we'll be looking at are Athena and Hermes. Now, chapter 6, which is the chapter on Athena, has some of the high points, I think, in the book, and also some of the low points in the book. I will sort of vent on some of that stuff. So the first part does actually at least tell the story of Athena and Poseidon's contest for Athens. So according to this story, this is the story in brief. Both Athena and Poseidon want Athens as their city, as the city that they're the patron god of. Now, obviously, the city's called Athens, so we know who's going to win before the story even starts, right? You're not St. Paul, Minnesota. The patron saint of St. Paul, Minnesota, is St. Paul. It's not going to turn out to be, Mother Teresa or some other saint because it's called St. Paul, right? The name of the city tells you who the patron saint is. So the same thing with Athens. It's clearly named after Athena, or Athena is named after the city of Athens. In this contest, what happens is the Athenians have the guts, or the chutzpah, to ask the two gods to give the city something, and then they will make a choice based on the gift. Athena gives them the olive tree, and the olive is crucial to ancient Greek economy. Olive oil was a big seller. It was a big export market. Olive trees don't require a lot of water, and considering the dry climate that you have in Greece, this is, it's a plant that's sturdy. The trees are sturdy. They are not going to die. You don't need as much water. You're still going to get the crop every year. You can eat olives. They used olive oil for soap as well. They also used it to cook. So this is and for lighting lamps, as the oil in a lamp. So this is important stuff. Great gift. Poseidon gave them a spring of water, which would be a great gift, except it was salt water, which of course is useless if you're inland, right? Salt water is great for sailing on or swimming in, but you can't drink it. So, it doesn't do any good to have a spring of it. The story says that they had a vote, and everyone in Athens got a vote in this instance. And that Athena won because all the women voted for Athena, and the women outnumbered the men. In the accounts, Poseidon gets, of course, angry. The gods always get angry when they lose. And to placate him, the Athenian men told him that he lost because of the vote of women, and that henceforth women would no longer be able to vote in Athens. Now, the story strikes me as something that was created after Athenian democracy. Prior to democracy, you had a monarchy, and then you had a tyranny, which is basically just a monarch who's not there by birthright. If you've got a king or you get a tyrant, you don't really need democracy. You don't need a vote because the leader is going to make the decisions. So it only makes sense in democracy. And it seems like the story was partly to explain why is it that you have democracy, but women don't have the right to vote in that democracy. And this story explains it, right? We have to keep Poseidon happy. So it does seem to be sort of like a special pleading sort of story. All right, the literary work in chapter 6 comes from a play by Aeschylus called the Humanities. Now, it's specifically a trial scene in the play. So we get the whole trial scene. Sadly, we cut something that happens right after the trial scene that I think is crucial to understanding it. And Maurizio, for some reason, cuts that scene short, which is unfortunate. Aeschylus was one of the three great Athenian tragedians. He wrote the Humanities in 458 BCE. It was performed in 458 BCE at the city Dionysia in March of that year. It is part of a trilogy called the Oresteia. So when people wrote tragedies, they didn't write individual tragedies. They would write a package of 3 tragedies. Then they would also write a satyr play, which was a comic play on Greek mythology. So it was not like a modern comedy, but it dealt with the same things that tragedy did, but from a comic perspective. We don't have the satyr play that went with the Oresteia. It was called Proteus. We know what it was called. We know what it's about. It's about Menelaus and coming home from Troy, but we do not have that play. But it would be a comic turn. The other 3 plays deal with the house of Agamemnon, the great leader of the Trojan War expedition, who, when he comes home, is killed by his wife and her lover. And then 10 years or so later, his son, who was about 10 years old, as it now is a 20 or 21-year-old young man, comes back to his hometown to get revenge. Now, he's not recognized because he's been away for so long, and ancient Greek city-states were quite distinct from one another, and they each had their own accent. So he grew up in another part of Greece. He would have had a totally different accent from the locals, so it makes some sense that he would not be recognized. We have all 3 plays. The plays are the Agamemnon, which tells the story of Agamemnon coming home, getting killed. The Libation Bearers, the second play, tells of Orestes getting revenge. After he kills the lover, that's fine, but then he kills his mom. He's hesitant about it, but he's reminded that Apollo told him he had to do it and that there would be penalties if he didn't do it, so he does it. It seems to be a moment of triumph. Clytemnestra had been sort of a tyrannical figure. She is now dead. Orestes, the rightful ruler, is restored, and everything's going to be fine. And then he runs screaming off the stage. That's the end of the play. The third play starts in Delphi, where Apollo's shrine is. And at Delphi, Apollo tells Orestes, what needs to happen is you've been persecuted by the Furies, who are the spirits of blood vengeance, who are driving him mad because he killed his mother. Now, his mother did kill her husband, but the husband and wife are not blood relations. Son and mother are. And so the Furies are going after him to basically get revenge for the mother's death. Apollo sort of forgives him of this, absolves him of this, but he tells him what you have to do is you have to go to Athens. There'll be a trial, and then we'll have to abide by the outcome of the trial. The next scene is in Athens, and in Athens he's put on trial. The Furies are going to be the prosecuting attorneys. Apollo is going to be the defense attorney, and Athena is sort of the judge, oversees the trial, but she's also the expert witness. And she's the one who cast the deciding vote to acquit Orestes. Orestes is acquitted because Athena and Apollo both believe that he acted properly by what he did because Apollo had told him to do it. And besides, Clytemnestra didn't just kill her husband, she killed the king, which is a big deal, right? Killing the king is like about the worst crime you can commit. Murder's bad, regicide is worse. And so, that ups the game. Also, he's avenging his father, and there you have a blood relation. So they make various arguments to sort of justify Orestes being acquitted. It's a tie vote in the jury, but Athena, by custom, gets to do the tiebreaker, and she always goes with the defendant. So she finds for Orestes, and Orestes is free. That's where the excerpt in Maurizio ends. And it's sort of unfortunate because it's not like happily ever after. The Furies are angry. The Furies have threatened to destroy the city of Athens if Athens acquits Orestes. Well, they just did that. So, are the Furies going to destroy Athens or not? Athena, using rhetoric, gives the Furies reasons why they should give up their old ways, join the new gods, and instead of attacking the city of Athens, become defenders of the city. And there was a shrine to the Furies, now called the Humanities, the kindly ones, on the Acropolis, that hill. There was a shrine to them, and that's where the theater was as well. So, and she wins them over. So I think the important thing is that there's a movement from blood vengeance right? Because we get Clytemnestra kills her husband because her husband killed their daughter. And then Orestes kills his mom because his mom killed his dad. And now there's a trial, and that breaks that cycle of, vengeance. That's supposed to, so that's really what the overall story arc is. And the Humanities is the climax of that. But to leave out that part where the Furies get convinced to become the Humanities, I think is a mistake. All right. The scholarship in chapter 6 involves something called structuralism. So structuralism is based on the structural linguistics of a man named Ferdinand de Saussure, who was a Swiss linguist. And Simon Goldhill, what we have here is the introduction to his translation of the Oresteia, which uses structuralism. So structuralism works like this. According to Saussure, words in a language have no meaning. Words in a language have no meaning. There's no inherent meaning to a word. The word shoe does not mean shoe in German. Well, actually, it does mean in German. It doesn't mean that in French. There's a different word for the same object. So there's nothing inherent about the word shoe to refer to footwear. The reason that we associate the word shoe with footwear is by convention, right? So we've heard it that way, we've learned it that way, we use it that way, it sort of reinforces it. But there's nothing shoe-like about the word shoe, right? It's just a word, it's just sound, right? And then it gets associated with things. And the way words mean things is in context with other words. And the way de Saussure would have defined it is something means something because it's this and not that. So you define things in structuralism in binary pairs. Sit versus stand. Dark versus light. Male versus female, right? Binary pairs. That's how language works. And it's all arbitrary and conventional. There's no inherent meaning in any of those words, but they mean something in context with other things and with long habit. Now, how does that work in looking at literature? Well, you can look at the Oresteia or any of the works that we've looked at and do a structural analysis. And so you're looking for binary pairs. To give you some examples, the Titans versus the Olympians, the older gods versus the newer gods, right? That type of male versus female. And in the Oresteia, you get those things, right? The Furies represent the old way of doing things. Athena and Apollo represent the new way of doing things. Right, so you can do a structural analysis, and it's actually sort of a good way because sometimes it actually shows, oh, okay, that's what's going on there, right, that you're not aware of. So it brings to the fore. The Goldhill introduction to the Oresteia, I think, is, of all the scholarship in the book, I think it is the section that I like the most. I mean, I'm sympathetic to structuralism to begin with, so that may be why, but I think it's very well written. It's written for a general audience. It's easy to understand. I think it makes its case well. So that's the plus thing. Now we're going to get to the not so good thing, and that's the other Mediterranean stuff. And here we're looking at ancient Egypt with the figure of Neith. Okay, so Neith is a goddess in Egypt. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus, who wrote around the same time as Aeschylus writing the Oresteia, that's pretty much their contemporaries. He argued, he went to Egypt, he argued that Athena and the Egyptian goddess Neith were the same goddess. That the Egyptians called her Neith, the Athenians and the other Greeks called her Athena, but they were the same goddess, so they represented the same things. And a man named Martin Bernal wrote a book. It's in 3 volumes, and they're thick volumes, called Black Athena, in which he argues that Athena was actually an African goddess, an Egyptian goddess, that the Greeks imported. So she's not originally a Greek goddess at all, but she was imported and then made to be more Greek. Bernal's theory is generally not accepted by the classical community. Not that they don't believe that there's no Egyptian influence on Greek thinking. We know that's not the case. Not that we don't think that Athena and Neith are connected, because Herodotus says it, and the Greeks seem to have thought so. No reason to sort of assume that they were all wrong. The problem is Bernal makes, stuff that supports his ideas, he provides, but things that might be critical of his ideas, he doesn't provide, and that's a problem. The big thing that's a problem in the selection is this the literary selection here, and it's from a selection from the cosmogonies of the Temple of Esna. Now, Esna is a city in Egypt. It is where Neith was the patron goddess. There's no problem with Neith and Athena being the same goddess or being variations of the same type of goddess. The problem is the cosmogonies of the Temple of Esna, what they say about Neith makes her seem more like Gaia. So Maurizio has selection in there, but the selection doesn't actually justify what she says. So it doesn't fit. And I think it's because she has a pattern that she wants to follow, and this was the only thing she could find on Neith, and so she included it, but I think it's actually a mistake. I think it does not work. Okay, the Nachleben, the afterlife here, Athena as political allegory, this is, I would argue, the weakest thing in the entire book. I think this part, I think, is close to crap. Because what she does is she looks at the Statue of Liberty and the French version of the Statue of Liberté. Right, we got the Statue of Liberty from France, and the figure of Marianne, who is a figure who appears in artwork about the French Revolution. She argues that they were inspired by the figure of Athena. They're both strong female figures, but there are other strong female figures. I don't see any reason to bring Athena into this. It doesn't make sense to me. The reason that the Statue of Liberty is female is because the French goddess Liberté is feminine, is a goddess and not a god. And because it comes from the Latin word libertas, which means freedom or liberty, that word is a feminine noun. So when the Romans imagined libertas as a goddess, she was a goddess because the noun itself is a feminine noun. So the Statue of Liberty is feminine because Liberté is feminine, because the Roman god Libertas is feminine. End of story. We don't have to bring Athena into it at all. At all. Athena has nothing to do with it. Okay? This is just, I'm sorry, but Maurizio is way off here. And the other thing is this figure of Marianne. Marianne is a peasant woman who fights like at the front line. So there are paintings of her, and she's in the front lines of the fighters of the French Revolution, fighting against the aristocracy. She's basically a French peasant woman who represents France. Well, again, the word France in French, France, is a feminine noun. France is imagined as la belle France, feminine. The beautiful France, feminine. Right? États-Unis, the United States, is imagined as plural because it's United States. And then certain countries are imagined as masculine because the noun is masculine. I mean, it's not rocket science here. Marianne represents France, the spirit of France. France is a feminine noun, so we've got a woman representing France. So, at any rate, I'm glad we got something about Marianne. I'm glad we got something about Lady Liberty. Has nothing to do with Athena. Okay, chapter 7. Chapter 7 deals with the figures of Hermes and Hestia. Sorry about how small that is. Hermes' special quality. So the chapter opens with a discussion of Hermes' special quality. And one scholar argues that Hermes' special quality is joy. Right? That's the special thing that distinguishes him from the other Olympian gods. A different scholar argues that it's movement. He's always a god on the move. I think in a way they're both right. Those are key features about Hermes. We don't get much about Hestia. Hestia is the goddess of the hearth, and there aren't any stories about her because she's basically a fireplace. And there aren't too many stories you can tell about a fireplace. Right? So she's not really anthropomorphized in the way that Hermes is. Hermes is a trickster figure. That's his primary thing. He's the god of roads. He's the god of travel. He's a trickster god. He's a very inventive god. And the literary selection here is Homeric hymn number 4 to Hermes, which is also quite humorous. It is Hermes he's a day old. He's a day old baby, and he gets a hankering for some hamburger, and he goes and steals 50 of Apollo's cattle. He kills 2 of them. He sacrifices them. He divides them in 12 equal portions, one for himself as one of the Olympian gods. So at this point, he's living in a cave, but he wants to be on Mount Olympus, and so he's already including himself in the group. Hermes, on that same day, invents a lyre, which is a musical instrument. There's a tortoise that he sees. He invites the tortoise into his house. He then guts the tortoise, so that it doesn't turn out so well for the tortoise, and then makes a lyre out of it, which usually has a back of a tortoise, which acts as the sounding board, right? It's a stringed instrument, so it'd be the equivalent of a guitar. So that's what's going on with Hermes. He's very creative. Apollo grabs hold of him because he stole his cattle, and he brings him to Zeus, which may be what Hermes' whole plan was originally, was commit a crime, get hauled onto Mount Olympus. Zeus will see you. He'll recognize you as his son, and then you'll be part of the team on Mount Olympus, and you'll be out of this cave. That might be his plan all along. If so, it works beautifully. But even if it doesn't work quite as Hermes expected, he's able to roll with things. He's able to improvise. It's really, there's a lot of fun to it. And I think the Greeks are really spot on here for having a god who is basically a humorous god, a god of tricks. The Greeks do not seem to have hated tricksters. They seem to see them as creative figures who get things done, and that's, I think, maybe a good thing. A lot of the other gods are sticks in the mud, but not Hermes. So, the scholarship in Chapter 7 is going to look at take a different scholarly lens on things. It's going to look at archetypes, and especially on the trickster archetype. So archetypes, this is Carl Jung's idea. His idea was that humans imagine things in terms of archetypes, that these are sort of hardwired into our brains, and that we sort of learn to recognize them. So these are things like the villain, the wise old man or the wise old woman, the young man trying to make it in the world, right? There are all these sort of archetypal figures. If you look at Star Wars, the A New Hope, right? You've got the wise old man, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You've got the smart, smooth guy in Han Solo. You've got, the cynical guy. And then you've got Luke, who is the rookie, right? And he has to sort of make good. Now, William Doty and William Hines are referred to in the scholarship. They didn't write the article, but their part in this is actually, I think, the key thing. They wrote a book about tricksters, and they found 5 characteristics that apply to most tricksters. And these are that the tricksters spurn convention, right? They do their own thing. They don't listen to what the commoners say. They don't listen to what the common opinion is. They're going to do their own thing. So Hermes is not going to stay in a cave. He's going to be on Mount Olympus. He doesn't care what other people say. He's going to be on the big time, right? So that self-definition is a key thing for tricksters. They usually turn things to their own advantage. They're very creative, and they can also shape shift. Now, Hermes in this poem doesn't shape shift as such, but he's good at playing a part. He's good at playing the baby. I mean, he is a baby, but he's also playing a baby, and that could be seen as a form of disguise or shape-shifting. But one key thing about tricksters is tricksters can be heroes or they can be problems. Loki, the Norse trickster god, is a problem. He actually causes the end of the world, Ragnarok, in the in Norse mythology. Because Trickster, and if you think of Wile E. Coyote in the Roadrunner cartoons, he's always messing up. So tricksters are not always positive forces; they can be negative forces. But Hermes and the Greeks view so Hermes is a positive trickster. He is sort of a cultural hero, and the Greeks present him that way. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't like Hermes. He's very personable. Everyone seems to like him okay. So I ran on a little bit long, partly because of that rant about Maurizio. Those two parts of chapter 6, sadly, I think I don't have a lot of faith in those or how she handles those. But most of the rest of the book is fine. There'll be, like, I think one other thing where I think she's like, yeah, it's nice that you're saying something, but it has nothing to do with what you're supposed to be trying to say. So, all right. See you next time.